everybody. Welcome back to another week of Chasing Frets, and I'm joined this week by Andy Ellis.
Hello there.
And I'm so excited to have one of my personal all-time favorite guitar players joining us this week, and that's Joey Landreth.
Yes, an amazing slide player. And our first episode is about open tunings, and Joey let loose with some strategies, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spoil this, but you have to listen. It is the most revealing strategy for how to understand open tunings that I have ever heard.
I'll spoil this. It's not a strategy for only open tune. This is a strategy for how to get your way around the fretboard and recognize shapes. And even in open tunings, Andy, in a way, even though the shapes are different, the concept relates back to like the cage system, where you take chord shapes and expand from there. Now, obviously in an open tuning, the chord shapes are different than in standard tuning, but the underlying concept is still there.
And he also goes into modes as well. So it's you got to listen.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
There's a lot of stuff in today's episode that you'll want to make some mental notes for your next practice session. Yeah. So you can hit us up at chasingfrets@premierguitar.com. And so we're going to get right to it. So here's our first episode with Joey Landreth. All right, Joey, thank you so much for joining us this week and being our guest of honor here on Chasing Frets. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Good. How's life up in Winnipeg, right? You're in Winnipeg?
I am in Winnipeg. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for not just saying Canada. I do appreciate that. We're doing great, man. Things are weird. Global pandemic is scary. Winnipeg is a pretty small spot, though, so we haven't been hit super hard by it. I mean, people have been sick and people have died, but it's nothing compared to some places. So we're very, very fortunate, and just laying low, hanging out, trying to be as creative as I can, and hang out with my wife as much as I can, because I've never been home off the road this long, ever in my adult life. So
wow.
Well, cool. Yeah. Well, we are thankful that you took some time away from her to hang out and get nerdy about guitar stuff with us.
Come on.
So today's episode is going to be about open tunings, and it's something you've come to be known for in a way. So can you tell us a little bit? Now, I know you've come to the office before. We've hung out some various times, so I'm going to probably ask some questions that I kind of know the answers to, So, but you play pretty much strictly in open C, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So and you have a guitar in your hands that we're going to be able to hear. So can you walk us through specifically what that tuning is and how you got started with it?
Yeah, so I originally started in open E, being a big Derek Trucks fan, Sonny Landreth fan, although Sonny uses like a billion tunings, but I think his kind of main one is open E, maybe I could be right, or open D. So I started messing around with that. A lot of my favorite slide players were using that tuning. So that tuning is intervallically 1-5-1-3-5-1, low to high. It's also the same thing as if you play an E chord in standard tuning and just drum that. And then I landed in open C because a really good friend of mine, a guy named James Robertson, affectionately known as Champagne James Robertson.
Ooh, that's nice.
Yeah, I know. Why is my name Joe?
How come you can't have a cool nickname like that, Joey?
I tried so hard, like Snake, Eagle, Rex. I don't know. It's never stuck. I'm just blame my parents for naming my brother and I after our mechanics. But my children, we're gonna name them as weird things as we can, so then they'll stand a chance in the music business, I guess. Anyway, weird tangent. I was playing at a festival in northern Saskatchewan called Ness Creek, beautiful little spot, and James was playing with an artist named Lindy Ortega, who's a really, really great sort of roots Americana artist from up here. She's originally from Toronto, but I think she lives in British Columbia now. But he was standing side stage during our set, and just came up to me after the set and said, "Hey, nice playing. I enjoyed that." And we got to talking, and I had my old 66 Deluxe with me, and we got to be friends kind of quickly. And I just said, hey man, I got my old Deluxe here. Do you want to use that for your set instead of using one of these crappy backline amps? And he had said, oh man, I'd love to, but just forewarning you, I use like a pretty low tuning, and I would hate to blow up your amp, but I guess it could be a risk. And I was like, nah, this thing has lived this long. Go for it. And so he played his set, and he was playing an open C with baritone strings on a regular scale length Telecaster. And it blew me away. I was just totally floored. And after his set, we chatted and hung some more. And he said, hey, what are you doing tomorrow morning? Are you playing at all? I said, no. He said, well, let's hang out backstage and jam. So we played, and we exchanged guitars during the jam. And he gave me his open C guitar, and I gave him, I think at the time I had my Duesenberg Fullerton TV, I think was what I was playing. And I was just taken with it. And a few weeks after that gig, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I took a friend of mine had built a Cootercaster, which wound up being my main guitar for a little while. And I filed down the nut with a nail file. Just because, like, you know how it is. You're so impatient that you just like. My dad is a luthier and repairman. Could have easily taken it to him, but I was like, no, I have to do this now. So I filed up the nut with a nail file and put on a set of baritone strings, and I haven't looked back. I took that guitar on tour, like literally 2 days later. We were playing in Philadelphia, and I was like, man, I feel like this open C thing was a mistake. I'm gonna put my normal strings back on and tune up to E. And I did that right before the set.
Uh-oh.
And nothing bad happened. Like I'm pretty good at tinkering with my guitar, so I'm not too worried about having to set stuff up. But I played one chord and was like, no, I can't do it. And I put the old strings back. I put the baritone strings back on, and I haven't played anything else pretty much since. Wow. So that's kind of the story. And Champagne James, I think he got the idea from, I can never remember the guy's name, but there's a Nashville slide guy who plays an open C. He plays at the Bluebird every week.
Mike Henderson.
Mike Henderson, thank you.
Yep.
That's the guy. And I'm pretty sure that's where James got it from. So Mike Henderson begot Champagne James, who begot yours truly. And so that's kind of the story behind that. And there was nothing really that drew me to it. I think a lot of people go, oh, well, is it better for singing, it's like, no, I just think it sounds cool. Like I still play in all the same keys. Playing an F sharp is a pain in the ass, but it's I just like the way it sounds. When you, it's really great. So yeah, that's how I feel about it every time, still to this day.
So I'm watching you. We're doing this, with Zoom, so I can see your guitar, which of course the audience cannot. So let me see if I can describe it. It's a gold top with P90s, and I know it's a custom build. It's not an official gold top. But back in 1968, I bought my first Les Paul, new. I wasn't paying collector bills, No. I went down, I was in Boston, I went down to E.U. Wurlitzer and bought what they told me was the last gold top in Boston. And this was 1968.
They chased all the gold tops out of town in 68.
Actually, you know what it was? I bought it in 69. It was a 1968 model because Gibson had retired the Les Paul. They weren't making Les Pauls. They came back with this with the P90 guitar. Anyway, it was $450 with a hard shell, the plush. And so that's what it looks like you've got. You've got the same kind of inlays and, binding on the fretboard and keystone tuners and, except you have a wraparound. Mine had, it had a typical stop tailpiece. That's one change that Gibson made. Anyway, my question is that you're in C tuning. You just played us this beautiful, growly, big, girthy sound. And do you have standard scale on that? Standard scale length?
Yep.
So that's the Gibson 24 3/4-ish.
Absolutely. Yeah, the guy who built this guitar is an incredible nerd and so every single detail that needs to be there is there. So the scale length is exactly the same. The like you said, the tuners are right. The back plate, the control plate,
Yeah.
is made out of 50s Bakelite. The switch tip is made from 50s Catalan rod. Like the whole thing, he's just he can't help himself. And we actually, as a lot of people know, intonation is tricky with rap tails at the best of times. And that was the one thing with this guitar that I struggled with was, with the stock straight tailpiece, the intonation was pretty brutal. And then we tried a compensated tailpiece, which generally are sort of the lightning bolt thing was I guess brought into play because people were using plain third strings. So when I tried one of those, and Alex said, I don't think it's going to work, and then I put it on the guitar and it made it worse because I use a wound third. But I noticed that when I intonated my guitars with adjustable tailpieces, the intonation curve was really, really different. And it didn't matter if it was Fender scale length or Gibson scale length, the intonation curve was roughly the same and very different than your standard tuning intonation curve. And so I said to Alex, I think I need an adjustable tailpiece on this. And he was just like, I'm heartbroken because they look so bad. They don't look error correct.
Yeah.
And I ended up buying a few of them, and I couldn't get over how, and I hated this because I'm one of those guys that I love all the purist stuff, but I also kind of hate it at the same time. So I hate the idea of sacrificing functionality for sort of nostalgia, if you will. But when I put these adjustable bridges on, it just didn't sound. The guitar. It kind of gutted the guitar. Still sounded great, but it just didn't sound anywhere near as good. And it was like this this memory I couldn't let go of. So Alex and I went to work and managed to get a gentleman to design us a CNC file off of the measurements that I took off of my Collings, which is the same scale length, but of course has an adjustable tailpiece. And then, so I don't know, you probably won't be able to see it because the camera is not that good, but this is actually a very, very, very custom tailpiece with an intonation curve that looks more like an EKG than tuning on intonation for a guitar. But it plays in tune about as well as you can get it to play in tune, And I also made a few adjustments to it. So at the 12th fret, it doesn't actually intonate perfectly, but that was to allow for a little bit of slippage sort of around the 7th and 9th fret, because when it was perfectly in tune at the 12th, it was pretty out of tune in here in this position. Which is kind of I use most of the neck, but I spend a lot of time. So having it be out of tune was just not an option. So we kind of cheated a little bit, but that's nerdy stuff, man.
No, that's exactly what we all live for, man.
Yeah, right.
But it's like it was one of those things that I didn't notice for the first 6 months of playing the guitar, and then I was on a session, and was like, oh man, that take was great, but it was just a little out of tune. Let me get it again. Extra tune the guitar, play it again. Damn it, it's out again. What the hell? Check the tuning. Oh, the tuning's fine. Oh, the intonation. And then once I noticed that the intonation was out, I couldn't unnotice it. And then it was just like anytime, then I was doing like this kind of thing. Bending the strings around to try and get them to play in tune, which I actually got pretty damn good at.
Amos Garrett does it really well.
Yeah. Amos is a bit of a hero in our house. My dad toured with him for a very short amount of time. He played a handful of shows with Amos. So,
wow.
And he played on my dad's record in 1990. Cool enough. I've never actually met him though.
Oh man.
But
So when you had this revelation at this festival and decided OpenC was the way to go, now did that parallel your interest in slide guitar, or had you already started playing slide guitar before devoting yourself to OpenC?
I had already started playing, yeah. So I really started playing in open tuning, and it started with Open E, of course, as I mentioned before, probably around 2008 or 2000 and No, it would have been a little bit earlier, 2007. And I had been interested in slide guitar before, but I didn't like identify as a slide player. It was just something that I did a little bit of. But then I got a call to play dobro on a tour, and somebody said, "Oh, I hear you play dobro," and I didn't, but I was like, "Yeah, sure." I went to Long and McQuaid, which is the Canadian equivalent of Guitar Center, and was like, "Hey, what's this nicest sounding resonator? What's the most accurate sounding resonator you guys have?" And it was like this $350 dobro branded, I guess Gibson made dobro brand Hound Dog.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, and it was actually a rockin' guitar that I toured with for many years after that. But so that's kind of what started on the open tuning thing, and then around that time, I was kind of phasing myself out of being a side person, and I'd sort of flown the idea of starting a band with my brother, across my brother, and say, "Hey, what do you want to do? You want to do this?" And we just, because I'd spent the last couple of years touring almost exclusively on that little dobro, I was just writing songs in that tuning, and I didn't really have any intention of making a switch necessarily. But it was, by the time we had written all the songs, they were all written in that tuning, and of course, it's not rocket science. It's not like you couldn't play those chord changes in standard tuning, but it just fit. And so I just stayed there and wound up sort of eventually phasing out of playing in standard tuning. I still do play in standard tuning from time to time, especially acoustic, like strummy stuff. There's no real substitute for a good old-fashioned cowboy chord. But
yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Just for the audience at home, Andy is strumming with a waggy head.
and a pretty good C chord. I think you could see that I was...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Perfect technique.
There's A minor right there.
Oh.
C, A minor. And I'm playing the House of the Rising Sun. Mm-hmm. A minor, C. Yep.
You guys you're missing a show. You're missing a show here.
But one thing I like about your playing is that even though you're exclusively in an open tuning, that doesn't limit you to just slide. I think one of the first times I saw you play without a slide, and I didn't recognize the shapes you were playing. So I knew there was trouble afoot.
Right.
So how did you, when you decided to make the leap and say, this is going to be my thing, how did you mentally kind of remap the fretboard in your mind to kind of deprogram a little bit from standard tuning?
That's a great and potentially long answer question, but the crux of it is I walked into it, having a fair amount of, I'm mostly self-taught, but like anything, I'm a really big nerd. So I've done a lot of studying over the years. So I had a decent amount of fundamental theory information. So
triads and chord construction and scale construction, that kind of
scale
stuff.
construction, modes, all that stuff. And I really wanted to go to music school when I was in high school. So I did bone up on a lot of sort of fundamental the stuff that you would need in order to get into school. Of course, I just got a touring gig and then never looked back. But so anyways, it was like, I wanted, there's a lot of this like sort of more robust harmony that I was missing that I had, I had my vocabulary in standard tuning, but it just didn't really cross over well in open tuning. And so I just started by sort of saying, okay, what do I know and how can I use what I know to figure out what I don't know? And because I quickly discovered that trying to map out symmetrical fingerings and patterns and stuff, it just doesn't lay out the same way. You get a lot of really great stuff in this tuning. Some tighter clusters are available, but what you do lose is like the nice symmetry of being tuned in mostly fourths. Mm-hmm. So I started with, I know that if I bar across all six strings, that gives me a root position major triad. And then I know that a major scale is built from a series of whole steps and half steps. So if I know that this is 1 and this is 3 and this is 5, then using the formula of the major scale, I can figure out where my 2 is a full step above. My 4 is a half step above my 3. My 6 is a full step above my 5, and then a half step below my root. So I kind of went about it that way instead of trying to go like, first position, second position, blah, 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 blah. It became my system for sort of mapping out the fretboard wrapped around the triad inversions. So, my root position triad, I had a chunk of scale in front of the triad, and then I had a chunk of scale behind the triad. So it kind of went that way. And then my first inversion triad, same thing. You can of course think about it modally, like, first inversion of the major triad would give you Phrygian mode, right? The third mode. And then Mixolydian starting on the second inversion. Things like that. So that was kind of how I did that. And then by mapping out all of the inversions and that is one thing that you can do position based, is the inversions. So then the scales wrap themselves around those chord inversions, and then going through and mapping out relative minors, as opposed to going F major, F minor, and then starting from there, I would go F major, D minor. So it was always within context of the key, and it gave me the tools I needed to get by on the gigs that I was like, okay, I really want to play my open tune guitar on this gig, but I need the fundamentals. I need major, minor, dominant, diminished, whatever. These are the chords I need. So I need to know how to generate them. And it really, it exposed a lot of areas that I had neglected in my sort of learning, in that, obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but a lot of us know these sort of formulaic ideas. A triad is root third fifth of the major scale. A major scale is tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. But we don't actually think about those things and put them into practice. In the process of teaching people, I'll go, okay, play me a major scale with one finger on one string. And they go, oh yeah, I got this. I know this really well. Shit. There it is. And that's when I go, okay, stop and think about it. Like, where are your half steps and where are your whole steps? I want you to count along and tell me where they are as they get there. 1, 2, 3, half step to 4, 5, 6, 7, half step 1. And by acknowledging those things, you're forced to interact with them. And now I can't kind of unsee that. Whenever I play a major triad, I know that my 4 is a half step above my 3, and my 7 is a half step up below my 1. So even though it may seem like, well, yeah, that's obvious, but it is obvious and it's not at the same time, but it's really, really, really paramount. And it's a really great thing to keep your mind on, because I think as long as you know where your root third and fifth is, you can kind of piece together anything else after that. You just have to be, adventurous or creative or whatever. But
and here's what I love about this kind of system you've laid out, Joey. It tells me two things. One, you just got to put in the work and know the notes on the fretboard. And I find so many students want some kind of super pill or some kind of magic thing to just, that. And two, the method you outlined there for an open tuning can work exactly the same for a beginning student who wants to tackle standard tuning.
100%.
The method is exactly the same.
Yeah.
There is no secret.
Right.
It's just doing the work and mapping them out in your head. That's it.
And I think one of the things that we skip over and need to spend more time on is the fundamentals of those things. Like, one thing I do with my students is let's learn all the major triads for a 1, 4, 5 up and down the fretboard. So once you kind of have that, then working through, those are what are called closed position triads, open position triads. Here I am exposing myself. And then taking them through the whole string set. And it's like, it's not, that's why I like classical music so much, because it's just like so much of it is, even the really crazy stuff is still very fundamental in its sort of construction. And I think a lot of times, like, I hear people playing, I can kind of tell when somebody hasn't done their homework by the way that they use certain things. And a lot of times I get people going, "Oh, I love all that chordal stuff you do." And it's like, I'm just playing 1-4-5s. I'm just trying to exercise all of the different ways you could play it. 1, 5, 1, 4, 1, 4, 5, 1. But I'm just going through the inversions, and the voice leading is deliberate, so it sounds more interesting than just going, you know.
Right.
So, and that's what I think a lot of people are drawn to, like Bach, and because it's just that it's, even though it's really, really simple in its construction, it's very robust. Anyway,
it's only worked for hundreds and hundreds of years because it works.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
What amazes me, though, listening to you, Joey, is as you played those changes, you know, I understand what you're saying about the voice leading and the open triads as opposed to the closed triads, you know, open voicings. But to hear it on low strings, there's this other dimension that we don't get on standard guitar. And when you started playing in the lower fret areas, you know, you were playing those voicings on fat strings. Man, you know, that's something that you don't get on standard guitar.
Yeah, it is really, really fun. My brother hates it, being a bass player. You know, like I'm
Stay
only
in your
allowed
lane,
to have
Joey.
so much low end coming out of my guitar amp before my brother's like, "Hey, get off my lawn."
Yeah.
I can play all the low notes I want. I just can't have like 50 hertz. I gotta high pass everything at like 200, and then he's a happy guy.
So to wrap up here, Joey, one of the big questions, people will maybe see a video you and I done or an interview or whatever, and they'll say, "Hey, come here, I got to ask you a question." I was like, "What?" He goes, "Does he really use 19s on his guitar?" Because they find it hard to believe. And I can say I've played that guitar. When you came to the office, you brought that guitar. I picked it up and I played it, and it's not that bad. It's not as bad as you would think.
No, and I think like a lot of the sort of preconceived notion about that is one, that my action is a million miles off the fretboard. It's not. It's I would call it medium action. It's not low, but that makes a big difference to make it playable. But then the other thing is it's tuned down 2 full steps, so it's still heavy. Like when I play in standard tuning, I use 13s or 14s, but I'm also not doing like a lot of. I'm not doing very much Albert King,
or,
you know
or
what
like
I mean?
Dave Gilmour. You know?
Yeah, I mean those like a tone and a half. I don't even think is possible. I guess it is, but.
Well, that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
I limit that just for my hand's sake.
Because a number of years ago, I did a clinic with Pat Martino, and I picked up his guitar, and he's, I want to say probably like 16s, something 15s, but he has standard tuning in E. That was way more difficult than 19s on your guitar, for sure.
Oh yeah, that and it would be. I mean, I use the Stringjoy strings, and Scott and I from Stringjoy, we have talked at length about, you know, trying to find string sets, because I do have guitars in D and in E, and I really want to try and keep the feel as consistent. So we've really messed around with like, okay, this string gauge tuned to this pitch is approximately this many pounds per square inch, you know, and so we try to match them that way. But and I do some, like, especially over quarantine, I haven't been playing very much, so for a little while, I had slightly lighter strings on here. I had 17s, 17 to 60. Oh. But that man, what a holiday that was. But I'm back to 19. Right now is 19 to 64 is on this guitar.
19 to 64. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joey. We're so happy to have you this week as our guest. Joey's going to be back later this week for a couple more episodes. And so stick with us, and we'll talk to you guys later this week.
Thanks for having me, fellas.